I now want to at least amplify on some of the possible repercussions for the justices of Nigeria and otherwise if the decision of January 14th, flagrantly fraudulent, issued in bad faith, to deny a fundamental internationally recognized human right to self-government, to participate in elections that are freely and fairly conducted. We have in the United States a recent law called the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act. And it does empower the President, at the request of the Secretary of State and various committee chairmen in the Congress, to list persons abroad to be denied visas, to have their assets frozen, to be excluded from commerce in the United States if they are complicit in internationally recognized human rights violations. And judges and justices are not shielded from that particular law. So that certainly would be a risk, in my judgment, to the Nigerian Supreme Court if this decision, flagrantly tainted, is not reversed. And it could impact not only the 7 justices who sat on the particular case, but the entire contingent of the Supreme Court. The whole institution has shown it is corrupted and compromised. Would encourage perhaps the others who weren't sitting to remind the sitting justices that there are others who would be impacted if they stood on their earlier fraudulent decision. It's also possible that you could have ordered an international investigation under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. It's arguable that wholesale deprivation of the right to self-determination, the right of self-government that has been witnessed by this decision is a crime against humanity. It violates Article 21 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It violates Article 25 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And certainly that's something that should be in the minds, we believe, of those justices. It's not a threat, it's simply an encouragement, an incentive to do the right thing. We want this to be win-win. It would restore some luster to the Nigerian Supreme Court. To paraphrase Alexander Pope's essay on man, error is human, but to confess error is divine, right? So at least those are the spectrum, I think, of possible actions in the United States. There may well be congressional hearings from the House and Senate Foreign Affairs subcommittees on Africa to examine what's going on. Members of Congress have an interest in ensuring that the substantial military and economic aid that we're providing to Nigeria is being used by a country that respects the rights of its own citizens under its own constitution. And that's something that in the past our Congress has been quite willing to exercise oversight of the appropriations it's providing to foreign countries. That's kind of the spectrum that we have, but there's also an importance, I believe, and why the media is important, that the more that is written about this, the more that this rises to the surface of a very, very critical problem confronting the most populous country in all of Africa, whose instability could have ripple effects throughout the continent, not just West Africa, would be very constructive in influencing the Nigerian Supreme Court. And I also think, however, as I explained earlier, this Supreme Court did not do this on its own. No judges would expose themselves to such ridicule unless there was some other force that was compromising their independence. And that means a hard look needs to be taken at the APC leadership as well. I don't know if you would like to also expand on what you think other possible remedies could be, and then we can entertain questions from the audience.
I just want to amplify that we believe that there's a possibility that the international community can be brought to bear, the UN, from the Declaration of Human Rights all the way through. This is a very, very serious matter. There's something that I didn't mention, and I hesitate to mention because I am not Nigerian, although I think Dr. Lloyd has bestowed upon me the honorary title of Nigeria man. And we had a conversation. It wasn't heated, but he acted like he was going to revoke my Nigeria man credentials, causing my 13-year-old son, who was in the car with me, to be very distraught. He said, "Dad, you have to stay a Nigeria man." But talking about children, when I was a little boy, when I was 7 years old, growing up in the middle of nowhere, Florida, in a swamp, closest town was 30 miles away. The first thing that happened in the world that brought to bear to me that maybe things weren't always right, maybe things weren't always good, wasn't the Vietnam War. Because I was in the South. It was correct and just, and we were the warriors. It was the Biafra War. And I remember very distinctly thinking, this just isn't right. This isn't right. This is a great people. It is a great nation. There was a country. And then later when I learned, something most people don't know, that there is a plausible argument that democracy began in Igbo land. The very first written constitution on this planet was written by the Igbo people. The very first democracy that involved self-governance, that worked for everybody, not just the Greek wealthy, but everybody, was in Igbo land. And the very first democracy that permitted women leaders was in Igbo land. The West, Europe, we were still in the Dark Ages. And yet the Igbo had figured out a way to have a just and meaningful government and a just and meaningful society and due process and fairness. And to this day, you see a great many Igbo leaders that are women. So it is my honor to have been able to work with the Igbo community. We are contemplating preparing an appeal to the United States Supreme Court related to the senseless slaughter and what we believe to be the genocide of the Igbo people. To bring this full circle, that has been going on since 2016, overseen by the APC. It's not ironic, it's not a coincidence, that the only APC governor in Igbo land is the one the Supreme Court just forced upon them. Not ironic, not a coincidence. Nigeria has just been placed with a visa ban, as everyone knows. That's not the United States picking on Nigeria. That is the United States seeing Nigeria, the Nigeria that exists now. Not the historic Nigeria, not the hopes of 1960, not the hopes of Iransi, not the hopes of the three founders, not the hopes back to the 900s. That's what Nigeria has become. And unless it gets better, it of course is going to get worse. It cannot get better unless the judiciary can be a bulwark against the corruption, against the senseless slaughter, the genocide, the tribal hatred, the regional issues of one part of the country gets to have the oil, one part of the country gets to grow the food, the other part of the country gets to have the finance and the business, and then the rest of the country gets to have the guns and the power and tells the rest of the country what to do or else they will perish. That's just the start. And the visa ban is just a start. If you read President Trump's words, compared to what he said about the other nations, it was as harsh or harsher than any other nation. He did not write this, or this wasn't written as though it were addressed to a strategic and historic ally. He was tougher on Nigeria in some regards than he was on the Sudan. And Sudan, who has been on the terrorist list for a long time, rightly or wrongly, that's where Osama bin Laden lived. That's where Al-Qaeda was born and nourished and nurtured. And yet, if you look at the visa ban for people from the Sudan, it is hopeful. You can get off of this. In Nigeria, it is far more stern. So the people of Nigeria need to understand this. And the Supreme Court needs to understand they have an opportunity to correct a wrong. And it is a wrong that is so blatant and so apparent that it is almost the stuff of comedy. But it's gravely serious. It is very, very serious. That's really all that I think we have. We would probably like to open the floor to some questions. We have a handheld microphone if anyone would like to ask any questions. Do you have any questions? Yes. Here.
Hi there, my name's Madison. I'm here with the Washington Times. First of all, thank you guys all for your comments. This was very informative and very interesting. I kind of wanted to go off of what you were talking about with the travel ban. And I just kind of wanted to hear general comments from people on the panel. Are you mostly in agreement with this travel ban? What are your overall thoughts, and how will this affect the U.S. Being in support of Nigeria? You were talking about that's something that we should support them in getting this ruling from the Supreme Court overturned, but how will this ban affect us doing that?
Are you referring to the rather aged travel ban relating to refugees and non-immigrants, or the recent order whereby Nigeria was listed among many other countries where you could not come and acquire citizenship or a green card?
Yes, I'm referring to the recent addition of Nigeria to the ban.
I think that the impact is indirect. I think the decision purportedly rested upon the inability of the Nigerian government to ensure that they had a proper way to screen and ensure that those who are coming to the United States were not implicated, radicalized in some way that created danger. That's kind of a different idea than the one we're addressing today, which is really an internal Nigerian matter. But overall, it does cast a further cloud, I believe, on Nigeria in seeking to attract foreign visitors or investment, and that cloud, I think, would only be aggravated if there's now no confidence that there's any judicial independence that would enable someone who are visiting from abroad to secure justice, whether if they're simply on holiday or they're engaging in business. But it's part of a larger pattern, I believe, that is casting doubt on Nigeria's ability to function as an ordinary state, when you combine it with Boko Haram and, unfortunately, many other controversies that arose with the election of Mr. Buhari, a former military dictator.
Professor Onye, same question.
Yeah, sure.
You want to go very quickly before you? I think the Nigerian people are very happy with the visa ban, and they would have asked for more. They would have preferred that the justices, all the justices of the Supreme Court, be specifically placed on a travel ban along with their families. And the APC leadership, and their families, APC leadership meaning the chairman of APC, the leader of APC, they should all be placed on a visa ban, because it's very, very obvious to Nigerians that this was orchestrated by that political party. They found a way to ensure that 2023, what you see playing out now is 2023. They just want to make sure that they have all the hurdles knocked down before 2023. And Imo State is one of the most populous states in Nigeria, and certainly the most populous state in the southeastern part of Nigeria. And they see that state as a very critical state. Nigeria is divided into 6 zones. northeast, northwest, north central, southwest, which is Lagos, the Yorubas, southeast, which is a homogeneous section, all Igbos. And then you have the south-south, where you have River State, Cross River State, Bayelsa, where you have the oil. In the southeast, there is no APC governor in the entire 5 states in the southeastern part of Nigeria, which has been bothering the APC people. So now they have succeeded in taking Imo, which they see as a bridgehead for 2023. That's what this problem is all about. So if the US government realizes where the problem is coming from, which is not necessarily from the president, although everything that goes wrong must be attributed to the executive branch because he's the head of a state. But what you see here is an orchestration by all progressives Congress. Basically, they have discovered a brand new way of winning elections through using the judiciary, and specifically the Supreme Court. I say specifically the Supreme Court because the Court of Appeal ruled in favor of Imo State. The tribunal also ruled in favor of Imo State. But I think who they have taken is the Supreme Court, because that's ultimately, the last court. And they figured no matter what happens down the trial level, it's the Supreme Court that would give their final ruling. So if the United States government places some of these visa bans on precisely the individuals or the groups or the organizations, i.e. the APC, then it will have more effect than just making it a general thing. So that's what I know Nigerians would prefer. So, Dr.
Can I follow up on that?
Yes.
Are you suggesting that this is a conspiratorial issue? Is this conspiracy on a global or even a national scale by the Supreme Court judges who made this decision? Is it conspiracy?
I don't know whether I can classify it as a conspiracy, but what I do know is that the facts are clear, that the Supreme Court was corrupted. The justices, beginning from the removal of the Chief Justice of Nigeria, Nigerians began to see the pendulum swinging towards one end. But they weren't quite sure what was going to happen. When he was removed, they were expecting that the Nigerian Judicial Council, NJC, would follow the process and put in someone who was qualified to be there. But they brought in Tanko Muhammad. So it became a bit obvious to Nigerians where this thing was going. And then after that, they rearranged the justices. Nigeria has 13 Supreme Court justices, not the way we have it here in the United States, where you have 9 justices. They have 13 justices. And from that 13, they can select 7 to hear a particular case. And that's where the Chief Justice derives a lot of what I call political, power. Because now he can choose the justices that he knows are going to listen to him. So in the case of Atiku versus Buhari, instead of following the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and cut it off, he took number 1, went down, took number 8, took 10, just selected the people he felt would listen to him. And so that's when it became obvious that the judiciary was completely gone. But when the Imo State judgment came out, If it had come out the way Atiku's case came out, which was the server, the card reader didn't work and all of that, very technical, Nigerians would have still maybe still been taken for a ride again. But in this case, whether it's by divine or for some reason, they did 2 + 2 = 5. And everybody said, wait a minute, 2 + 2 has never been 5, you know. Well, the Supreme Court said, well, 2 + 2 is 5. We're the final. So whatever we say is final, you know. And so it's very obvious that this Supreme Court does not have the guts to tell the APC leadership, we're sorry, we can't do this. They don't have that guts. So if they don't have that guts, it means that the system is completely, you know, gone, because governments are run by institutions, you know, ministries, departments, and agencies. That's how governments are run. When you destroy those agencies, those departments, those institutions, you know, the table crumbles. If you take the 4 legs of a table, the table, you know, crumbles. So Nigeria has been standing on one leg, the judiciary. Is the common man's hope. But right now, that leg has just been chopped off. So that's the concern. You know, if the United States will step in and increase the visa ban, and as Mr. Bruce Fine has said, I think the Magnitsky...
Global and Human Rights Accountability.
Yes, and anything they can do, you know, because see, the Nigerians are coming here to ask for help. The Nigerians here who are Americans are the ones asking for help, you know, because if you don't ask for help from your neighbor, he might not know what is happening internally in your house. So Nigerians are saying, wait a minute, there's no way we can counter this. We cannot anymore, because the judiciary that we used to rely on is gone, you know. And it's very easy for the Nigerian government to quickly say, we're a sovereign state, you can't tell us what to do. That's a major excuse that they would very soon have. And so America is not telling them what to do. America is basically saying, wait a minute, your constitution says you do it this way, you do it that way. Just follow your constitution. We're not telling you to follow American constitution. We're not telling you to take American standard or international standard. Take your standard. They have failed woefully, even going by their own standard. So if there's anything that the United States can do, and I think the easiest thing they can do is the visa ban. They've already started it. You know, the visa ban was not placed because of the IMO judgment, which means there are other issues that have caught the international community's interest. And now we're bringing this up, that this is the final straw that would break down Nigeria. And as the Bruces said, if that happens, the effect in Nigeria and in the sub-region would definitely spill over to the United States. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And so it would be nice for them to nip it in the bud now and save stitching time, saves 9. So that's the way I see it. Thank you so much. Okay, let's...
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
A statement has already been made that the visa ban is not as a result of the Supreme Court decision. But the visa ban is a demonstration of what United States is foreseeing happening in Nigeria. I have read that visa ban front and back. And we are thinking of how do we fashion our either acceptance of the visa ban or opposition of the visa ban. And we found out that visa ban is a reaction to the policy we perceive the government is carrying out, which is what? Open border that Nigeria has with some countries that are already under sanction by United States. In other words, those citizens from some countries that have been banned by the United States have free ride into Nigeria to obtain visa and travel. So I think the United States is reacting to that, to the fact that if we place all these restrictions on you, you will be able to get a message that there are people that are coming through your borders that we don't want. That is number one. Number two that is really happening, United States is trying to somehow protect the eastern part of Nigeria, or the eastern or southeastern part of the southern part of Nigeria. The reason is that these cross-border practices happen mainly in the north. The north has no boundary with some of these countries, Mali, Ethiopia, Niger and so many of those countries. Those borders are porous. Meanwhile, the borders in the south are strengthened. That's where you have Nigerian soldiers with guns and ammunition and everything stationed. So that area is secure, but it is the northern borders that is not secure. In other words, that is where most of these crossover. During elections, they stream into Nigeria to vote. And after that, they go. They stream into Nigeria to commit crimes. And then after that, they go. However, where we really feel aggrieved from the southern part is that it is people from the south that come to United States, that need United States visa, that bring their parents, that bring their brothers and sisters. Those in the north end up in the northern part of Africa or Britain, Europe, Saudi Arabia. They really don't come here. When you look at the population, it's a population from the south. In other words, the visa ban affects me, even though it's meant to protect me. So that is why we are thinking to support the opinion here that the visa ban, we shall be appealing to the United States government to be specific, to point it, to say, if you are doing something like this, you will be affected, and not to do it as a blanket for the country. That's where we think the visa ban is so broad that should be defined. We need that to be defined. And we support it to the extent that it will send a message to the government that, listen, you have to show up your border. You have to make sure that your airport screening is up to snuff. You don't have to be a transit for anything, drugs, terrorism, or anything. We don't want that to happen. And because the government is not cognizant of what it's doing with this no visa requirement, that is creating trouble for the country. So in other words, as I'm saying, we are trying to juggle the answers and know where our opposition will come from. Thank you.
I would just add, not to beat a dead horse, but as a non-Nigerian, I'm reluctant to answer this question, but I think you can see from the people speaking, the Nigerian diaspora is perhaps like any other in the world, perhaps like any other in the history of the world. The most doctors in North America, the country where most doctors in North America come from outside of North America, is Nigeria. It is a well-educated, learned, hardworking, contributing diaspora movement. As Professor Stanley said, they come from the South mostly, and most of the problems are in the North. But I think, if I can guess, as someone as an observer or a commentator on Nigeria, the visa ban is a very difficult issue. It is good for most Nigerians that finally someone recognizes something's wrong, something's very badly wrong, and it needs to be fixed. But it hurts them. The reality of it is, and I just want to expand on Dr. Stanley's, what it's showing, I think, a lot of people have a presumption that at worst, the worst part of Nigeria, that they know about Nigeria. There are a lot of things going on that most people don't know about. One of the things that's looks like it's starting to happen is these new Supreme Court justices may be looking to impose Sharia law because they're from the North. That's very problematic. You can only guess what's going to happen after that, and it may happen anyway. But the visa ban, what it shows and tells is that in Nigeria, there are no documentary, there's no structure or integrity. There are no identification methods, which is extraordinary for an advanced society. They don't have a way of telling who you are, where did you go, have you been convicted of a crime, are you on any sort of a wanted or watch list. And they do that, mostly the North, they do that on purpose because it suits their needs. But it doesn't suit the needs of the South and the Southwest and the South-South or the Middle Belt. They're the ones that are suffering. So it's a tough issue. It's a balance. It's good that the United States government is recognizing. It's something that Mr. Fine and I have tried to get them to recognize the bad things that have been going on. But it's bad for Nigeria. The hope is that it will be seen for what it is, which is a clear message of you better join the League of Nations. You better join the rest of the world in figuring out what you need to do to be a meaningful participant. The sad part is it's happening not to a backwards, middle of nowhere country. President Trump has his term for them that I won't repeat. It's happening to the giant of Africa, the heart of Africa. That if we lose the heart of Africa and the giant of Africa, we will lose all of Africa. It will just be turned over. If there is an eruption of all of the bad things that could possibly happen in Nigeria, the entire continent would be lost. And that's the serious nature of what's going on here. And the sadness that I can only imagine. I told a story about being a 7-year-old boy. These people that are here, they live it. It's their life. It's who they are. And they had to leave Nigeria to find their way and to make use of their talents that everyone here wishes they could go back to Nigeria and use. And the world would be better for that. So that's the very long answer to the very good question, and we apologize. Any other questions? Okay.
Add to what has been already said. The question is, what do we think about, since Nigerians here, what do we think about the visa ban? And I think to a large extent that has been responded to by Dr. Stanley Onye. And also Dr. Lloyd Oku, which is that in general, Nigerians like it. They have their reservations about it, obviously, but it's definitely for them better than not. And one thing that is also very unique about it is that since that visa ban, every condemnation of how it happened has been excuse me, has been heaped on the president, Buhari. Buhari, the people are holding him accountable for whatever precipitated the visa ban. Now, I agree that as a first step, that is a good thing. What we now need to do is to hone it and sharpen it and target it to those who are the perpetrators of trampling on people's human rights. The APC has been mentioned here, the leadership of APC. I think those people should, definitely be, put on the books for this. The Supreme Court justices who took this bizarre, fraudulent ruling should be targeted as well. In fact, an attorney who went to school with a couple of the justices after this said he had a conversation with them to see what happened. And they told him that we were operating under instructions. These were from the Supreme Court justices. So the fact that the whole thing about the case is so bizarre is not an accident. They had to rush this thing to get the desired result. So going forward, like we said, I think we are happy with the visa ban, but we would like for it eventually to be narrowed and targeted to those who are the perpetrators.
Thank you so much. I wish I didn't need a microphone. I have a loud voice anyhow. I'm hearing you.
Could I just
Dr.
interject
Fine?
before your question? And that is that to encourage, I think, the Nigerian Supreme Court, they might remember that it wasn't all that long ago when the Pakistani Supreme Court, then confronting a dictator, Pervez Musharraf, had suspended all the laws and he was ruling by military decree. And the Supreme Court of Pakistan declared that Mr. Musharraf had committed treason. He was ousted from his position. I think he's now in prison or in some kind of exile, receiving treatment. But the Supreme Court confronted a very powerful dictator and prevailed. And that ought to, I think, embolden the Nigerian justice to think that it's not clear that if they stood up to Mr. Buhari, that the Nigerian people wouldn't rally to their support like they did in Pakistan, and he would be the loser. Anyway, I just wanted to make that observation that this has happened before, a confrontation between the judicial branch and the executive dictatorship, and the judiciary won.
Dr. Barrister Fine, because you are an attorney, do you see a link between the Supreme Court shuffling for the decision that was made and terrorism? Since any other term may not apply, would terrorism be linked to this decision that was made by the Supreme Court, especially since it was shuffled?
I don't know whether it's the shuttling, that you're referencing the abandonment of the seniority system to choose the justices that would sit.
Even with the ban.
Yeah. I think it suggests that there was some level of coercion that was employed. Now, whether or not the coercion was large sacks of cash or a threat of violence, I don't know. Cash, the term would be bribery. If you're threatening to disappear a justice, kill, or otherwise, then that could be something akin to what happened to Mr. Khashoggi at the behest of MBS. But I don't think you could know which avenue of coercion was used just on the basis of both circumstantial evidence and what we know.
I would add that the only tie I think that you could see, well, not the only, but the tie that I see is it shows a misdirection. It shows a lack of attention to what should be done, a misdirection of the resources and the use of the government in Nigeria away from what you would expect it to do toward what can only be seen as a consolidation of power. I would correct Dr. Lloyd here where he said that APC has found a new way to win elections. They're not winning elections. They're winning power. They didn't win the elections. They lost the election. The elections become superfluous. It's a seizure of power. So to utilize the army to carry these apparently, obviously fraudulent voting results when there's no one fighting Boko Haram, and Boko Haram and the terrorists have been spotted in the forests around Lagos and Oyo throughout the Middle Belt. That's a misdirection of the resources and ultimately the fundamental purpose of why the government is there, to keep people safe and safe in their home. The three things that I read you about what the judiciary should do, that's generally you could apply them to most of the government. But I would say that that link there, yes, it's a way to accumulate power. That seems to be the central focus of the APC-led government, whether it's Tinubu or Buhari, the cabal, or whoever else. They are intent upon gathering power. They're not intent upon taking care of the people, taking care of the country. They've even turned their back on the economy of the country. Right now in the Delta region, the world still thinks of it as it thought of it in the late 80s and early 90s, that it's a dangerous place. There's the vandals. They're blowing things up. They're killing people. Nobody should invest their money there, and that couldn't be further from the truth. That's not true. There should be a concerted effort by the governors to get together and convince the world to come here and invest. I mean, for God's sake, it's a port on the Atlantic Ocean. top 10 in oil production. And yet people keep their money away from there as though you were being asked to invest in a coconut farm in Montana. It's just absolutely extraordinary. And the government doesn't care because they want power. That's all they want. So I think it is only another symptom of a self-serving government, a government that is turned inward. The best job in Nigeria is to be in the state assembly or to be in government. It's a good job. You make a lot of money. And there are no expectations.
You don't make money, you steal a lot of money.
Well, you do. That's right. That's right. Like they don't win elections. They grab power. They're not making their money. They're stealing. But those are easy things to say, but they're all true. So yes, that connection, I can see that connection of the shuffling. It's just another symptom of what are these guys doing here? What are we doing here? Why are they doing this? And the answer is they just want power.
Dr. Lloyd, when he said that the justices should be banned, I started thinking, okay, they don't usually come here anyhow.
They do.
They do. Oh.
Yes. They have their kids in universities here.
But I think you mentioned the families as well. And it's oftentimes the wives and the kids come here even if the justices do not. And it signals as well. Obviously people have a pride in their reputation. It's clearly a stigma to be listed as someone who violates internationally recognized fundamental human rights. And I don't think anybody relishes that.
I was just thinking that the ban was against OIC countries, of which Nigeria is one.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, that's in reference to terrorism. So I'm still can't get the connection between the court action, the ban, and OIC. Something is missing there. What's the ban for Nigeria? Why?
Well, the ban that was explained by the State Department was that there was an inability to screen those who were coming to the United States for radicalism or terrorism to give the United States a confidence level that we would not be importing criminals or violence. Now, that was the stated reason. Now, that doesn't have any immediate connection to the corruption of the Supreme Court.
We want that now.
Yeah, that we were asking to go beyond that. Remember, the visa ban does not apply to just visitors. It applies to those who want to come and become green card holders or U.S. citizens. The visa ban that we're speaking about to be imposed on the justices or on the APC would mean you can't even visit the United States for any reason whatsoever.
And that would likely arise from the global Magnitsky Act.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And of course, again, along the lines of your question, one cannot also put it away from reality that the shuffling of the Supreme Court that brought a Sharia Chief Justice is also a concern because this is not somebody who ordinarily is qualified based on the kind of attorneys we have in Nigeria that are very, very well qualified attorneys. For them to bring the only person they could find to make a Chief Justice was.
Use the microphone.
Can you rewind, please?
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm saying that I can't, put that to that thinking about how unsafe that we can with this kind of Supreme Court justice that we have. That the shuffling that was made kind of took away or overlooked hundreds and thousands of very qualified, attorneys in Nigeria. The only person they could find to become the Chief Justice is a Sharia lawyer that basically doesn't have, the broad-based experience that one would expect from a Nigerian Supreme Court. Given the
Remove the Chief Justice, would that change it?
well, I don't know whether it will change it or not, but he definitely sent a signal. For anybody, that would be a wrong signal, especially for communities where we have our feelers up for Sharia-related conversions that most Christian societies now in Nigeria and abroad are very sensitive to.
Let me just say one thing, and then I'll sit down. One of the things that we have been amplifying in terms of the visa ban is that the visa ban, even though it's targeted at Nigeria, there in the country, it affects us here very much. It affects us here. As a matter of fact, it denies us some of the rights that we have here. If you are an American citizen, you can petition to bring your mother, your brothers and sisters down here. This visa ban nullifies that. Some people that have wives, they are here, they are green card holders, they are citizens, they cannot bring their wives from Nigeria. In other words, that has consequence for us here. People that have adopted children, they cannot bring them over here. In other words, when you look at it, we are directly impacted here, even though we might support the intended consequence. So that's why if what we have been saying here is that we are going to appeal to the State Department, to the United States government, to somehow modify that, knowing fully well that the law-abiding citizens here are seriously being impacted.
I think the U.S. citizens, Nigerian Americans, should call their Congress on call to action and let them understand that they should place the ban on the Supreme Court justices and the leadership of APC, because that's where the problem is coming from. And in responding to your question, if you remove the Chief Justice, would there be a difference? The answer is no, because that's not where the problem really is. It doesn't originate there. They're merely a tool to achieve, it's merely a tool that APC is using to achieve this, political gains. Any Supreme Court justice that you place there, if it's not strong, will be threatened. If you do not do this, we will remove you. Not only will we remove you, we are going to find something criminal and then prosecute you for that. So here is the kind of judgment we want you to deliver on these cases. Especially when you removed the Chief Justice and replaced him with another person. That's a big favor. Yes, you replace him with that person, and that person is obviously going to take directives, instructions, from you. So, but the problem is not that the Supreme Court justices woke up one morning and said, listen, this Imo State case, we're going to convert 2 + 2 to be 5. They didn't do that. It was the government, the APC people that said to them, this is how we want you to do it. And so if pressure needs to be brought to bear, it has to be on the APC leadership and also on the Supreme Court justices, because they are the final actors. They could have said no, but they didn't. So you're punishing them for not standing up to the oath of office, that they took. So that, in my viewpoint, is what the visa ban and other pressures, is the visa ban that we're very familiar with. But if the U.S. has other means of pressurizing or convincing, let's put it this way, not pressure, convincing the Nigerian government, the Nigerian judiciary, to do the right thing, it will be very nice. If it requires diplomacy, maybe talking to them behind the scene, that should also be done by the State Department to encourage them to, do the right thing. That's what we think would take care of this situation. So, Mr. Bruce is going to just close it up.
Well, I think that we'll have Mr. Fine close it up. The only thing that I would suggest is to build on what Lloyd, perhaps to focus it a little bit. Congressmen may be reluctant to discuss removing the justices in another country, but what they will not be reluctant to discuss, everyone that sees this tape, everyone that visits this website, or however this turns out, or goes to Kaftan or reads the Washington Times report, if everyone called their congressman and said something has to be done, this is the continuation of the deterioration of Nigeria, the collapse of democracy in Nigeria, the collapse of Nigeria. You must do something. And if they ask you what, say, write a letter demanding or directing that this judgment needs to be reversed. That's where we are right now. The further, bigger issues, perhaps sometime later, not to be forgotten. But for right now, the collapse of Nigeria, the collapse of Nigerian democracy. Call your congressman. They will do that. Senator Menendez wrote the letters for Sawari. It wasn't because he had an extraordinary interest in Nigeria. It was because his constituents called him. There are many friends to Nigeria in Congress. Representative Chris Smith from New Jersey. Representative Karen Bass from California. They are the people that will get this done, and they will send a letter to President Buhari, perhaps even to the Supreme Court, directing them or suggesting or asking that they reconsider this decision and set it aside as a travesty of justice and a collapse of the democracy in Nigeria. So if we don't have any more questions, I'm going to ask Mr. Fine to go ahead and summarize. And again, for me and for everyone here, being so presumptuous as to speak for them, thank you for coming. Thank you very, 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 very much.
Just to close, justice is won by persistence. There's so many things in life that are imponderable, so never get discouraged, never give up. If it doesn't happen immediately that the court reverses its decision, you continue to persist. That is one lesson that you've got to learn. And in our own situation here in the United States, the civil rights movement, after a dormancy for about 100 years, suddenly took traction. The second thing is the United States is, through simple encouragement and force of opinion, oftentimes decisive abroad. I think we were instrumental in ending apartheid in South Africa and in ending one-rule government with Britain in what's now called Zimbabwe. At one time it was Rhodesia. I think Ferdinand Marcos exited the Philippines and Manuel Noriega, Panama. So we shouldn't underestimate the importance of the United States and the voice that it can have in this effort to cure what is clearly, I don't even want to use the word injustice. It was just raw power. The decision is so bad. It was just as though someone just made up the result without even having votes and said, we're declaring this person a winner because the transparency of the fraud. And I think that this is also, an encouragement throughout Nigeria. This case is exemplary, but the strength of the judicial branch is key to having rule of law and having stability. Without access to justice, where you can redress grievances, and all peaceful political avenues of redress are closed, the ramifications are quite terrifying. And unfortunately, that's a risk that right now hangs like a sword of Damocles over Nigeria. And we're here to try to prevent that from happening. Thank you. Class dismissed, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.